residential aged care. Where there is widespread community transmission, there is a significant impact, and unfortunately and tragically, there are deaths. Our swift and decisive action, our frontline response, our decisions about borders, our national pandemic plan and our hospital agreements, the strength of the public health response in Australia has seen us avoid the scale of tragedy in aged care seen in so many other countries.
Sarah Holland-Batt is an aged care advocate and an associate professor at the Queensland University of Technology. She joins me now. Sarah Holland-Batt, thank you for your time tonight. You've called for Richard Colbeck to go. Why?
Oh, look, Colbeck's performance has been absolutely dismal. I mean, and the dismal performance has been around long before his missteps in terms of the deaths, the tragic deaths that have occurred in aged care. Colbeck has basically been absentee aged care minister. He hasn't made significant progress on 3 areas that the Royal Commission identified as key urgent areas of action. Last October, the Royal Commission handed down 3 recommendations that there needed to be action on young people with disabilities trapped in aged care, on the monumental aged care wait list, and on the issue of widespread chemical and physical restraint in aged care. Richard Colbeck's done nothing on that. He can't even get the number of people who've tragically lost their lives correct, not once but twice, first in the COVID committee and then he fumbled with the number again in the Senate. It is inconceivable that Colbeck can remain in his role after this series of missteps.
You've had first-hand knowledge of the aged care system with your father being abused in the system. What's your assessment of how the sector has handled the coronavirus pandemic?
I think the sector was fundamentally unprepared and the government knew it was unprepared because of the findings in the Royal Commission's report. So the Royal Commission report, the interim report last October, identified issues of understaffing, chronic understaffing, lack of adequate skill mix, the fact that the sector has difficulty attracting and retaining staff. All of these issues were well known to the government well before the coronavirus ever was on our radar. The government did nothing to prepare the sector or fix the workforce issues in aged care. So that's the first thing. The government had many things it could have done prior to this to improve the situation in aged care. The government knew about issues about baseline care not being met, about dehydration, malnutrition, people not receiving adequate care, abuse and neglect. All of this was well known to the government. This is the reason, supposedly, that Scott Morrison called the Royal Commission in the first place, was because he was aware that the sector was struggling to care for the elderly within it. So the government should have been well aware that there would be major issues in handling an unprecedented virus like this, a pandemic, in a sector already under tremendous pressure. And instead of having a plan in place, the government had a set of guidelines which were so vague as to beggar belief. You know, these easily interpreted guidelines advising providers to essentially come up with their own plans. And that was the government's response to a pandemic that affects the elderly disproportionately. It's absolutely disgraceful, the lack of planning that the government has had in place. It's known about this for months and it's done nothing.
So do you think the buck stops with the federal government, which has oversight of the aged care system, or does the Victorian state government need to take some blame here because it allowed the virus to escape from hotel quarantine in the first place?
I think the blame sits fair and square with the federal government. They regulate aged care. They're entrusted with aged care policy making. They fund aged care. They are entrusted with oversight of the sector. And the issues that we're seeing, the aged are dying in hugely disproportionate numbers compared to the rest of the community. And the spread is occurring in a disproportionate, exponential way in aged care facilities compared to what's happening in the community as well. It is entirely the federal government's responsibility. It didn't set providers up for success here. It did not require people to do compulsory PPE training. That was voluntary and online until 2 weeks ago. I mean, the lack of factors, of things that the government had in place, truly shocking.
Yeah, mandatory mask wearing was also only brought in July. What needs to change here? And are you confident that the sector has a handle on things now?
Well, the first thing that needs to change is that Richard Colbeck needs to go. I think the public has completely lost confidence in him. I certainly have lost confidence in him entirely. The Prime Minister clearly has lost confidence in him because the Prime Minister has taken some of his key duties away from him but kept him in the role. So I think the first thing that needs to happen is we need a change of Aged Care Minister, and the Aged Care Minister needs to be elevated to Cabinet and take this issue and this sector seriously and the challenges it's facing seriously. So that's the first thing that needs to happen. The second thing that needs to happen is hospital transfers need to happen the second that an aged care resident is infected with COVID, because we're seeing time and again that these facilities are just not able to control the spread. And why would they be able to do it? They've been underfunded, understaffed, and really neglected by the federal government and by the regulator for years. So they're not prepared for it. So there needs to be immediate hospital transfers to protect residents who don't have the coronavirus from catching it, because residents have the right, as we heard at the Royal Commission, to remain negative from the coronavirus. And at the moment, they're sitting ducks in these facilities.
Yeah, Queensland and South Australia have mandated that now. Should this sector be a for-profit sector?
Well, look, I think we've seen the really pernicious effects of profiteering. We look at the exorbitant amount of federal government funding. 80% of the sector's funding comes from taxpayers' coffers. And we see for-profit providers posting gigantic profits from a sector where we know that some of those same providers, such as Bupa, have made headlines for failing baseline care in more than half of their homes. So at the moment, providers are incentivised to spend as little as they can on the care itself. They're incentivised to just meet the accreditation requirements with the bare minimum and retain money as profit. And that's just absolutely obscene when we're talking about vulnerable elderly people not receiving the care that they need. The fact that people are posting hundreds of millions of dollars of profit of taxpayer money off the back of the suffering and neglect of the elderly is just an indictment on the government's inaction on aged care.
Sarah Holland-Batt, thanks so much for your time tonight.
My pleasure.
Mike Pence has accepted the Republican nomination for Vice President on the third day of the party's national convention. He addressed the convention from Fort McHenry in Maryland, the site of an 1814 battle which inspired the words of the US national anthem.
4 years ago, I answered the call to join this ticket because I knew that Donald Trump had the leadership and the vision to make America great again. And for the last 4 years, I've watched this president endure unrelenting attacks, but get up every day and fight to keep the promises that he made to the American people. So with gratitude for the confidence President Donald Trump has placed in me, the support of our Republican Party, and the grace of God, I humbly accept your nomination to run and serve as Vice President of the United States. Over the past 4 years, I've had the privilege to work closely with our president. I've seen him when the cameras are off. Americans see President Trump in lots of different ways. But there's no doubt how President Trump sees America. He sees America for what it is. A nation that has done more good in this world than any other. A nation that deserves far more gratitude than grievance. And if you want a president who falls silent when our heritage is demeaned or insulted, he's not your man. Now, we came by very different routes to this partnership. And some people think we're a little bit different. But you know, I've learned a few things watching him. Watching him deal with all that we've been through over the past 4 years. He does things in his own way, on his own terms. Not much gets past him. And when he has an opinion, he's liable to share it. He's certainly kept things interesting. But more importantly, President Donald Trump has kept his word to the American people.
Hurricane Laura has made landfall on the US